This is part one of a two-part series where I'm going to analyze the relationship dynamics from both sides, from both the woman's point of view and the man's point of view. I have heard some Polish women complain about the patriarchy or that the men are extremely dominant, but this seems to be from extremely privileged women who come from rich families. And my theory for this is because I think a lot of it comes from the universities. The bigger complaint that I hear is that Polish men are unambitious and weak and unable to step up. You can maybe say that that's because of Western values that are coming into the country. It could also be because war-torn countries usually create this dynamic in women, because this dynamic is not unique to Poland. It's also something that I saw in Korea, in Vietnam, and this is prevalent in Latin America. Like in Colombia, for example, the single motherhood rate is like 80-something%. Thankfully, here in Poland, you don't have that problem. From my personal experience talking to Polish men, yes, some of them are quite ambitious, and it's usually the Polish men who have either traveled or lived in other places around the world. The culture, because it's a collectivist culture, teaches people to conform. And in a system where conformity is the most important thing, women tend to dominate more than men. So to figure out the cause of these issues, I think it's important to look at Polish family dynamics. So from what I can see, most Polish families experience this dynamic where they have a very strong and overbearing mother who will often baby their boys and make them into mama's boys. And I also noticed that a lot of times the mothers will openly disrespect their husbands. The women will often yell at the men, and this even comes from the daughters. You know, my buddies will tell me that when they go to their family gatherings, the women will often lecture the man or yell at the man or scold the men, or some form of an absent father. So maybe they were working but they weren't there emotionally, or they were there emotionally but couldn't provide financially, or they were alcoholics. And you can see this, at least in the big cities, how the relationship dynamics are. For example, here in Warsaw, in Poznan, in Wrocław, in a lot of places, the women are the ones leading the relationships. And the strategy that a lot of men will use, especially the young men, is that they'll just spend a lot of time with the woman, you know, make her feel good emotionally, agree with everything that she says, and that will usually lead into a relationship. Because of this, you have a culture that produces women who are very strong, independent, competent, responsible, and also take care of a lot of the house chores. The men are often babied, not encouraged to face the world or take any responsibility, because the mothers do a lot of those for the man. And an interesting observation I've made is that a lot of times when you meet people that go to university, especially the women that have boyfriends from small towns, the boys are more inclined to stay at home in the small town, whereas the women are the ones that are traveling to other places to study. They put a lot of pressure on the women, on the daughters, to go out there to work and have a job, to not be dependent on a man, and to cook and clean and to do all these household things where the boys are not expected to do as much as the girls. So when a man is in his masculine energy, he is grounded, assertive, ambitious, willing to take the lead, not afraid of conflict, and is able to set the direction of the family unit. These are the qualities that I believe almost every single woman in the world wants out of a man. And when a woman is in her masculine energy, it's because she's not receiving that from the man, so she feels like she has to take his place. Also, I want people to keep in mind that I'm not even saying that this is a bad or good thing. All I'm saying is that when women have too much stress of trying to keep up the family, like financially and all of this pressure, it takes away at what makes women so great, which is their caring, feminine energy. I also believe the smoking has a lot to add to this, because I've noticed here, like, Slavic people like to smoke, but particularly the women. So many women here smoke. Like, the vaping is a huge problem. But I also think it takes away from their feminine energy, and it also contributes to making them a lot more masculine. I believe that women are the most important thing on the planet. They are the prize, because women provide the most important thing on the planet, which is children. That is something that women can do that men cannot do. I think Slavic women are the most beautiful women in the world, because from a physical standpoint, they are on par with the most beautiful Latinas from Brazil or Colombia, but they are also very intelligent, they're loyal, they are taught a lot of wife skills like Latinas from a young age, so they can, you know, normally cook, clean, take care of the household. A lot of Polish women feel underappreciated in the household, and that's why a good amount of them like dating foreigners. Because I come from America, which I believe is kind of where the most entitled women come from. The women here bring a lot to the table, and it's something that foreigners appreciate more than a local man. The majority of Polish women will end up with a Polish man. This is how the whole entire world is. Most people want to date within their culture and their whole entire race. So I'm not saying that Polish women in general prefer to date foreigners. What I am saying is that the ones that are open to dating foreigners, these are the main grievances that they say. Women's love and their feminine energy is so powerful. I would say it's one of the most powerful things in the world. And I have this theory. A woman can only really fall in love 2 or 3 times in her life. If you look at how a woman pours into like men that she's been with, usually it's the first 2 or 3 men that get the most of her. Depending on how good or bad those relationships end, each relationship takes a piece of her away. So a good example would be, let's say, I believe the first relationship that a girl ever gets into, she pours 100% into. If it ends well, maybe she can get 60, 70% back. But if it ends poorly, she can only maybe get 30% back. And maybe you can get some of it back with therapy and as you heal, but I don't think that she ever really reaches that 100% again. And I think that after the 3rd one, she completely gives up on love altogether and she becomes quite bitter, actually. So this is why I think it's extremely important that women's love and their energy are protected, because if you give it to men who are not worthy or who do not value you, I think it does a lot more damage to women than it does to men. One thing that I've noticed in Poland, there's like this mentality in saying that men are kind of just dumb animals and women are the smart ones and women are the logical ones. And this is especially common in Warsaw and the big cities like Poznan. When I was in Poznan, I was very shocked to see the relationship dynamic because the women were the ones that were leading. The problem is when you encourage women to be more independent, successful, and to not rely on men, you also teach men that it's okay to not be reliable. And women now are not searching for men who are reliable as a valid partner. They are searching for completely different things, such as emotional intelligence, physical attraction, so like height, for example, and potential. I think the biggest mistake that women make is that they often fall in love with potential. You know, a lot of people say that men have 2 heads, one up here and one down there. I would argue that women also have 2 heads, one up here and one right here. I love him because he just understands me. He's spending all this time with you. He's giving you all this attention. But the problem is that if a man is truly on his business and he is ambitious, he doesn't have the time to give to you to be able to give you all this emotional energy and everything, right? As women get older, their desires and what they want from a man change. Their expectation usually is like, okay, I want to take this man who has not proven himself, who is good, emotionally intelligent, all those things, but then I can turn him into this masculine, ambitious man. And I think it's a failure of understanding of what men and women truly want. Now in Poland, I feel like there's this wave of that we are equal, 50-50. But just because we are equal in importance to society, it doesn't mean that we are the same or that we want the same things. I often see this more from women, that they'll complain that like, I did all of these things for the man, and they expect because they did all of these things that the man should do the same thing back to them. And I think it's because women are a little bit more community oriented and see equality through that lens. Whereas I think men view things more as a team, like in a sports, for example. So for example, in a basketball team, you have a point guard and a shooting guard and a center. They are all equal in terms of importance to the team, but they all have different roles. And I think men better understand this idea of hierarchy and different roles, whereas women expect more of like, if I'm gonna do all of these things for the man, I also expect him to do the exact same thing 50-50, right? You also have to take a look at who that benefits. You know, a lot of women like to complain that men are usually manipulators or they're narcissists. If a man is truly about his business and he's truly a masculine man, he can get women based on just what he offers as a man, right? He doesn't have to do any of that manipulative stuff. The ones that are doing all the manipulating are the weak men, the men who know that without the manipulation, they cannot get the woman that they want. And that's why there's the trend of this whole performative masculinity going around, all these guys who are trying to pretend that they like all these feminine things. It's a manipulation tactic, try to show that they are different from the other guys. Maybe you'll say that, hey, I think masculine men can also do the manipulation. But what I would say is that if you're complaining that masculine men are not emotionally intelligent and they can't even understand their emotions, how would they be able to manipulate your emotions? It's the men who are super in tune with their emotions and think about this. Those are the ones that are trying to manipulate you, right? Doesn't that make sense? And when you have a culture that discourages traditional masculinity in forms of more the feminine ideas of what they think masculinity should be, like emotional intelligence and vulnerability and being kind and all of these things. Weak men benefit and they manipulate their way into getting these women. When you have a more emotional man, yes, maybe they're a little bit more in touch with their emotions and they can make a woman feel a certain way, but they often lack the traditionally masculine traits, right? This is something that I notice, and especially young men, right? You can get a man who's super ambitious in trying to achieve, but he's lacking on the emotional side. But then you can also get an extremely emotional man, but he's lacking on the ambition side, right? It's very hard to find both in one person, especially in young men. Whereas I think women are a lot more capable of tapping into their feminine or their masculine side based on what the situation requires, because I think women in general mature a lot faster than men. Women are exposed to the reality of the world, especially if they're beautiful from a young age. Ask any woman who's had some form of like curves, like a womanly figure from 13 or 14 years old. She has men of all ages sexualizing her, which makes her feel uncomfortable, yes, but that exposes her to the reality of the world a lot quicker than men who don't have that problem, right? And I don't think it's smart for women to pick men that they are emotionally connected with, but then also expect him to become super ambitious and all of these things just because she is, right? And this is what leads to the dynamic of the woman mothering her boyfriend. When the woman is like the mother in the relationship, then you don't get a man, you get a boy. Whereas what I've noticed in my personal experience, I've dated a lot of Polish women who are quite, I guess, masculine when they are in their everyday life. So when they're at school or when they're in groups or how they present themselves. But with me, they're able to soften up and they're able to become women again. And I think that's what women truly want and are actually craving for. I don't think Polish culture really encourages that. And I'm not the only one saying this. There's a lot of podcasts here in Poland that talk about this dynamic where Polish boys are constantly being mothered by their girlfriends because that's what they experience from their moms. And it seems to be like a really big societal issue more than anything. We have to think about what is the main reason why men are ambitious. Yes, there are a small percentage of men that are doing it just for the love of the game. They have to be ambitious, they want to be the greatest. But the main reason why men work harder is to get women. Women are the prize. You guys are the most important thing on the planet. Now here's a thought experiment, right? Imagine you're a 17-year-old guy, have achieved completely nothing, and just because you are tall or you're a little funny or because you are born in a specific city with this girl, then you get some of the most beautiful women in the world without even having to try. You as a woman, you get with him, you've completely taken away the incentive structure for him to be ambitious and to be better. And this is why I think women need to be very smart with the men that they choose, because if you are already with him and you're taking care of him, you know, you're cooking for him, picking up after him, and you're giving him sex, what incentive does he have to improve and get better? He already has everything that he needs. And this is a big risk for women because I believe they're gambling on every single man that they choose to be with. Is it possible that this man will eventually become successful in the future? It is totally possible. All I'm saying, a lot of people, especially guys, have a lot of potential and say all these dreams and all these things that they want to be when they're young. But by the time they're 30, you realize who is truly about that life. And you realize that most people are average or do not reach their full potential. And all I'm saying to women is that I would rather gamble on a man who has already proven himself than a man who has not proven himself but has this potential that you seem to see. And I think a lot of times women project their fantasy of what their perfect man is in their partner. And that causes a lot of friction because when the man doesn't live up to that expectation, then the woman has problems. Now, I'm not saying that you have to get with the guy who's 30, but you can tell pretty early from the men who are like 24, 25, who are focused and very ambitious. And this is why I think the father's opinion is very important, because if the father is also that kind of man, he can recognize it in other men because real recognizes real. I think it's important to also study Ukrainian women and the dynamic that they have with men. Ukrainians are escaping war. I believe that they are at the most baseline survival of what it means to be a human. A lot of people say that Ukrainian women are gold diggers, but I don't think that's the case. I think that when you are in a survival mode, you understand what is the most important thing to look for as a woman, which is protection and provision. But that's also why they are the best at performative femininity and sensuality, because they know that in order to get what they want, they have to leverage the most powerful tool that they have, right? I like to say that there are no feminists left in Ukraine, because as soon as something real happens, like war, all the feminism goes out the window and we go back to our biological programming. Women tend to look for provider traits in a man, and men tend to look for beauty and youth in women. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? A lot of people like to say that it's societally pushed, but it totally removes the concept that a lot of this is actually evolutionary based. I want to talk about why women seem to have extremely high expectation nowadays, and I think it's three main reasons. Number one, even though a lot of Polish fathers treat their daughters really well and become their best friends, it seems that they have a problem with putting their foot down and being able to give the women masculine correction. So in turn, maybe they're not telling the women 100% the truth. I think another aspect is a lot of older women lie to these younger women because they try to sell this fantasy of the boss babe. So a 35-year-old woman who is in her career and saying that she doesn't need a man and that she's happy without kids, even though the majority of them are either alcoholics or on some form of depression medication. And after 30, it's much more difficult for a woman to have kids. And to be fair, I'm not saying that all of these women who are in their later years want kids and want to have this family. It's one thing to say that you don't want it when you have the option to do it, but it's another thing to say that you don't want it, but you also don't really have the option to do it anymore, right? So that's why to me, it sounds a little bit more like cope and lying rather than actually telling the truth. 30 years old seems to be this age in almost all cultures around the world where men would agree that, like, okay, a woman is not in her prime anymore. I don't know how to describe it. It sounds really effed up to say, but this idea of 30 exists in China, in Latin America, here in Poland, everywhere in the world, because the biological component of it, right? And I also believe number three, social media. Social media is so toxic because I think women are very community oriented, and I don't think women actually know what they want. They want what other women want. That's why when men bring women from other places around the world to America, for example, they often will get Americanized because people in general, we are affected by the desires of the group. There's this idea called mimetic theory that goes into this. And I think because women are more communitarian and more reliant on community in general than men are, their interests are a lot more dictated by the group. And there's evolutionary reasons for this, because back in the day when we were living in tribes, men are more capable of defending themselves if they get shunned by the group than women are. Women need to be protected by the group. It's not to say that women are less capable or not as intelligent, but it's more from an evolutionary standpoint because of the physical differences between men and women. And also because of the way a city works, when you don't have a lot of friends and community around you, I think the power of social media gets a lot more heightened. Social media like TikTok and Instagram all of a sudden becomes your new community. It's called social media, right? And I think men more use YouTube as their form of community, whereas women are more convinced by Instagram and TikTok. Also, in a lot of ways, I feel extremely bad for women because I find that it's very hard for them to get honest advice. The only people that can really tell them the truth, I believe, are either their fathers or older brothers in their life. Especially if they're a beautiful woman. It's hard to get honest advice from other guys because a majority of this men, if not all of them, want to have sex with her. So of course they're not going to tell her ugly truths that can potentially put him in a bad light. They're usually just going to agree with all of her decisions. But also, women don't really tell each other the truth. And older women also won't tell them the truth because I think they're fearful of competition. And ask any beautiful woman who has worked under female bosses, you'll know that they're some of the worst experiences that they've ever had. And I do believe it's because of this core jealousy and competitiveness that women have with each other. Men compete with other men to get women, and I think this is a little bit more explicit, but women also compete with other women for men. Nobody wants to talk about this, but it's the truth because there's only so many men to go around, so of course you're competing with your intersex counterparts for the best possible man. And it sounds really ugly, and I know a lot of women will say, well, I don't really like to compete, but we do. Of course we do. And if men are competing for women, why aren't women competing for men? Doesn't that also make sense? I know a lot of people nowadays want, especially if their parents have a beautiful relationship where they were partners, 50-50, all of those things, they want the same thing too. But they lived in a much different time than we do now. And I believe there are two things in modern society that have greatly affected relationship dynamic. For men, It's porn. Back in the day when porn was not a thing, women's sexuality was a lot more scarce and men had to do a lot more to get it. So that's why men were a lot more loyal and they, committed to one person because there was no other options to explore their sexuality. But now with the ease of online porn, women's sexuality is no longer valuable. But on the flip side, social media has damaged the expectations that women have for men. Men no longer have to work as hard for women's sexuality, so that takes away at their ambition. But women also have higher expectations for men that the men can't provide. So you have this growing culture of unhappiness between men and women. Also, I think one of the reasons why couples before stayed together for so long is because they had shared mission, but also they needed each other. That's why I think this modern mentality of a woman not needing a man is so toxic, because if you tell women that they don't need a man, they're screening for things that don't really contribute to long-term success. Back in the day when things were hard, or during the communist times, men and women, they had to be together because it was the best chance that they had at survival. But once you take that aspect away, and now people can just get together because of emotions or how they feel about each other. Emotions are passing things and they can easily be manipulated. Your emotions get manipulated when you listen to specific music, when you watch specific TV shows, they make you cry, when you're watching stand-up comedy and it makes you laugh. I believe the relationships that last the longest are the ones that have a shared goal and a shared purpose. And if we start screening for those things, I think on a long-term scale, this is what leads to the happiest relationships. But if we're just like, I love you, you love me, but we don't need anything from each other, once the feeling is gone after like 2 or 3 or 5 years or whatever, what is really keeping us in the relationship? I had a conversation with my sister recently that was very interesting. I was asking her about her dating life and why she's having so many issues finding the right partner. And something interesting that she said is that I wish that men were more emotionally intelligent. And if I had a son, I would raise him to be more emotionally intelligent. And I challenged her on that. I was like, okay, if that's what you really believe, did any of the guys that you slept with or you dated, did any of them have that? And she said no. So this is one of the core lies that women will tell to each other and tell to their boys, is they'll often villainize the father or the dad in their traditionally masculine role, and they create these boys to be more emotionally intelligent, but they're making the boys that they are repulsed by and they're complaining about in the future. And I have personal experience with this because my dad came from a patriarchal Chinese family, whereas my mom came from a matriarchal Catholic Chinese Filipino family. And when I was younger, I was a part of this mama boy problem, because when I was growing up, I had a lot of issues with my dad. We were fighting a lot, but then I also realized my mom kind of treated me as her son husband. She would often take me shopping with her. She would often pay for things with me, and I would kind of be her emotional punching bag. And that's how I learned to be really in tune with, I guess, my emotions. In this mama's boy dynamic, the boys end up becoming a lot more like husbands than their actual husbands. And this comes from the fact that my dad was working all the time and he wasn't quite there emotionally. So because my mom lacked that, she found that in me because I was her son. The problem is that if you teach men to be good boys, you're not necessarily encouraging them to be good men, which will require them to be ambitious, go out in the world, achieve. That's something I see a lot more with Ukrainian men actually than I do with the Polish men. What women say is that they want a more emotional man, but I don't think that's the right terminology. An emotional man is an angry man. A man who doesn't know how to control his impulses, who is not disciplined, who doesn't know how to control his emotions. An emotional man is a violent man. I believe that a man should be emotionally intelligent, be able to be vulnerable without showing weakness, and have an understanding of his emotions. However, here's a really big problem. I think women have really high expectations where they want both the emotionally intelligent man who is also very ambitious and in his masculine. But then you ask around and then I'll say, okay, well, have you met any of these guys in real life? Have you dated any of these guys in real life? And a lot of times women will say no. So I'm like, if you've never seen any examples of this in real life, how do you know that this exists? Men all over the world, no matter what age we are, find women the most attractive when from 18 to 25. I don't think this is disagreeable. And women think that they can wait until 30 to have a family. It is possible. You can wait till that long to find a man, sure. But if your goal is to have a family with the best possible man, doesn't it make sense to find that man when you are at your peak beauty and when you are the most desirable to that man. So what I would tell my daughter personally is like, you can do whatever you want in your life. All I'm saying is that you have to understand what men value. And if you want the best possible outcome in the long term, it would make sense for you to find a partner now instead of waiting until later when you're older and you're not as desirable to men. And I'm not saying that women are not desirable as they get older. But if you ask a woman and she's being honest, did she get more attention from men when she was 20 versus when she was 30? Most women will tell you that they got more attention when they were younger. And every woman knows this. Some women, as they get older, they do become a lot more beautiful, but I think there's something about I don't want to say naivete because that sounds really kind of gross. Pure feminine energy for when a woman is young inspires men in a way that an older woman can't do to the same extent. That's all I'm saying. I know that this may sound all kind of gross to a lot of women out there, but I think a lot of men agree with what I'm saying. Ultimately, this is why a strong father figure is very important in choosing her partner. And I do believe that women should go to their father for advice if they have that relationship with him. He's probably going to be the most honest with her for picking partners, because if he is a true loving father, he's going to want what's best for her in the long term. So next week, we're going to dive into the men's side of everything, but I would love to hear what you guys think down below. Do zobaczenia. Bye.